The ranch house sat like a forgotten promise against the Montana sky, its weathered cedar siding silver gray from decades of prairie wind. Marcus Thompson had bought the place 12 years ago with dreams bigger than the mortgage payments back when his wife Sarah painted nursery walls butter yellow and hummed while she folded tiny clothes that would never be worn. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The for sale sign in the front yard had been there so long it tilted at an angle that made visitors think twice about stopping. Not that many did. The nearest neighbor lived 4 miles down a dirt road that turned to soup every spring, and the mailbox at the end of his driveway collected more dust than letters. Marcus preferred it that way now. Silence had become his closest companion, as reliable as the morning coffee he drank standing at the kitchen window, watching the sun creep across land that stretched endlessly toward the Rockies. The quiet didn't judge him for wearing the same flannel shirt 3 days running, or for eating cereal straight from the box while standing over the sink, his reflection in the microwave door showed a man at 42 who looked older than his years. Dark hair shot through with premature silver, shoulders that had grown broader from ranch work, but somehow seemed to carry more weight than muscle. Green eyes that used to crinkle at the corners from laughter now held a steadiness that spoke of too much solitude and not enough hope. The house itself bore witness to his gradual retreat from the world. Sarah's piano in the living room had acquired a fine layer of dust. Sheet music still spread across the bench where she'd left it the morning she drove to town for groceries and never came home. The accident report was filed away in his desk drawer, but the empty passenger seat of his truck told the story every time he drove past the intersection where the drunk driver had run the red light. In the months after the funeral, well-meaning friends had filled his refrigerator with casseroles and his answering machine with invitations to dinner, church socials, and hunting trips. They meant well, but their voices carried that careful tone people use around broken things, and their eyes held pity he couldn't stomach. One by one, he'd let the friendships fade, returning calls later and later until eventually he stopped returning them at all. The ranch work kept him busy enough. 200 acres of hay and cattle, a small operation by Montana standards, but more than enough to occupy daylight hours. He'd sold off most of the herd after Sarah died, keeping just enough to justify staying. The barn held memories in every corner, but it also held purpose. And some days purpose was all that kept him moving forward. His routine had calcified into something predictable and safe. Morning coffee and weather reports on the radio. Check. The remaining cattle, repair whatever fence the wind had knocked down. Maintain equipment that was older than some of his neighbors. Lunch was usually whatever he could make without thinking. Dinner often skipped entirely. He'd fall asleep in his recliner more nights than not, waking with a crick in his neck and the television murmuring about places he'd never visit. The phone rarely rang anymore. His sister in Denver called every few months, her voice bright with forced cheer as she updated him on her kids' soccer games and school plays. She'd extended countless invitations to visit, to come for Christmas or Thanksgiving or just because, but the thought of being around a happy family felt like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. The dating suggestions had mercifully stopped after he'd turned down his neighbor's daughter's friend's cousin for the 3rd time. Nobody seemed to understand that he wasn't lonely in the way that could be fixed by meeting someone new. He was hollowed out, carved empty by loss, and the echo of his footsteps in the too-quiet house had become a familiar rhythm. The computer in his home office gathered dust except for the monthly ritual of paying bills online. He'd never been much for technology, preferring the weight of tools in his hands to the click of keyboards. But lately, the isolation had begun to feel less like healing and more like drowning, and sometimes late at night when sleep wouldn't come, he'd find himself staring at the dark screen and wondering what it might be like to reach out to someone Anyone who didn't know his story, that's how he'd ended up on the website. Not a dating site exactly, but something that promised connection for people who understood that life sometimes required unconventional solutions. The profiles were modest, respectful, nothing like the glossy advertisements for romance that populated other corners of the internet. These were people who'd been weathered by circumstance, who understood that sometimes love wasn't about butterflies and candlelit dinners, but about finding someone willing to share the weight of living. He'd created a profile more out of curiosity than hope. Marcus Thompson, 42, rancher, widower. Looking for companionship and perhaps something more with someone who understands that life isn't always kind, but can still be good. No games, no drama, just honest conversation with someone who might understand. That starting over doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. The responses had trickled in slowly. A few women who seemed nice enough but lived too far away or wanted too much too quickly. He'd exchanged emails with a schoolteacher from Wyoming who wrote thoughtful messages about books and gardening, but their phone conversations felt stilted, filled with the kind of careful politeness that suggested neither was entirely sure what they were looking for. Then Elena Martinez had written to him. Her message was different from the others, direct without being pushy, honest without oversharing. She was 34, originally from New Mexico, and had been caring for her late sister's children since a car accident had left them orphaned 2 years ago. 7 kids, she'd written, ages ranging from 5 to 15, and she understood completely if that was more than he'd bargained for. Her photo showed a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the magazine sense, but there was something in her expression that suggested strength gained through experience, the kind of resilience that came from shouldering responsibilities others might run from. Their correspondence had stretched over several weeks, emails growing longer and more personal as they discovered unexpected compatibility. She wrote about the challenges of suddenly becoming a mother to 7 children with no preparation, about sleepless nights worrying about money and school clothes, and whether she was doing right by kids who'd already lost too much. He found himself writing back about the weight of empty rooms, and the way grief could make you feel like you were living behind glass, watching life happen without being able to reach through and touch it. When she'd suggested they meet, he'd surprised himself by agreeing. Not a date exactly, but a chance to see if the connection they'd found in words might translate to something real. She'd been planning to move anyway, she'd explained, looking for a fresh start somewhere the kids could have more space and fewer reminders of everything they'd lost. The plan they'd eventually settled on felt both practical and terrifying. She would come to Montana not as a mail-order bride exactly, but as someone willing to take a chance on building something new with someone who understood that families could be made as well as born. If it worked, they'd figure out the next steps together. If it didn't, well, at least they'd have tried. He'd spent the last week preparing the house, not just cleaning, but really seeing it for the first time in months. The layer of dust on everything, the way he'd let disorder creep into corners, the gradual accumulation of a man who'd stopped expecting visitors. He'd aired out the guest bedrooms, stocked the pantry with food that might appeal to children, and found himself standing in the toy aisle at the general store in town, overwhelmed by the bright colors and wondering what 7 children he'd never met might like to play with. Now, as the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, he found himself checking his watch for the dozenth time. Her bus was supposed to arrive in town at 4:30, and he'd offered to pick them up at the station. 8 people, counting Elena, plus whatever luggage they'd managed to bring. His truck would be cramped, but they'd make it work. The nervousness in his stomach felt different from anything he'd experienced since Sarah's death. Not the sharp panic of grief or the dull ache of loneliness, but something that might actually be anticipation. For the first time in 3 years, he had no idea what his evening would look like, and that uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like possibility. He'd changed clothes twice, settling finally on his best jeans and a button-down shirt. That Sarah had always said brought out his eyes. The thought of her didn't sting quite as much as it used to, and he wondered if that was progress or just the numbing effect of time. The sound of tires on gravel made him look up from his coffee cup, and for a moment his heart hammered against his ribs. But it was just the mail truck, leaving a stack of bills and advertisements that he'd look at later. The driver waved as he pulled away, and Marcus lifted his hand in return, part of the small choreography of rural life that continued regardless of what else was happening. 20 minutes until he needed to leave for town. 20 minutes until his carefully constructed solitude would be shattered by the arrival of 8 strangers, who might become something more. He'd told himself he was ready for this, had spent weeks convincing himself that loneliness was worse than uncertainty, but now that the moment was approaching, he felt the familiar urge to retreat, to call Elena and make excuses, to preserve the safety of his empty house and predictable days. Instead, he rinsed his coffee cup and placed it in the dishwasher, straightened the kitchen towels, and grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. Whatever was about to happen, it was already in motion, and Marcus Thompson was going to meet it head-on. The Greyhound station in Millerville consisted of a single bench outside Murphy's Gas and Grill, where the interstate buses made their scheduled stops twice daily. Marcus pulled his truck into the gravel lot at exactly 4:25, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary as he scanned the empty parking area. A few truckers sat at the counter inside the diner, their rigs idling in the lot behind the building, but there was no sign of the bus or its passengers. He'd arrived early, a habit Sarah used to tease him about. "Marcus Thompson, you'd show up 30 minutes early to your own funeral," she'd say, laughing as she applied lipstick in the passenger seat mirror. The memory hit him unexpectedly, and he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the rumble of diesel engines and the smell of French fries drifting from the diner's exhaust fan. At 4:37, the bus wheezed into view, its silver sides dusty from highway miles and its destination sign reading Denver, Salt Lake, Seattle. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, climbed down and opened the luggage compartments while passengers began filing off. Marcus watched each face, trying to match the woman from the photograph with the real person about to step into his life. She appeared third from the back, herding children ahead of her with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to keep track of multiple moving pieces. Elena Martinez looked smaller than he'd expected, maybe 5'4" in worn sneakers, but she moved with purpose as she guided the children toward the luggage area. Her dark hair was longer than in her photo, braided down her back, and she wore jeans and a red sweater that had seen better days, but was clean and carefully mended. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The children clustered around her like planets orbiting a sun. The oldest was clearly 15, a girl with Elena's dark hair and serious expression, carrying a baby who couldn't have been more than 18 months old. Behind her came a boy who looked maybe 12, his arm protectively around the shoulders of twin girls who appeared to be around 8 or 9. 2 more boys brought up the rear, one maybe 10 and the other closer to 5, both carrying backpacks that seemed too large for their small frames. Marcus climbed out of his truck, suddenly aware of how his boots sounded on the gravel, how his height might seem intimidating to children who'd already had their world turned upside down too many times. Elena spotted him immediately, her face breaking into a smile that was equal parts relief and nervousness. "Marcus?" Her voice carried just a trace of an accent, warm honey over steel. When he nodded, she extended her hand in a gesture that was formal but friendly. "I'm Elena. Thank you for coming to get us." Her handshake was firm, her palms slightly rough from work, and he found himself holding on a moment longer than necessary before releasing her fingers. "Welcome to Montana," he said. then immediately felt foolish for the inadequacy of the greeting. She turned to the children, who had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle behind her, watching him with expressions ranging from curious to cautious. "Everyone, this is Mr. Thompson, the man I told you about who's letting us stay at his ranch." The 15-year-old stepped forward, shifting the baby to her hip. "I'm Isabella," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "Thank you for having us." There was something in her manner that suggested she'd taken on responsibilities beyond her years, a protectiveness toward her siblings that reminded him of a mother bird guarding her nest. "This is Miguel," Elena continued, indicating the 12-year-old boy, who offered a shy wave. "And Sofia and Carmen, the twins, identical except for the fact that one wore pink sneakers and the other wore purple. Diego, the 10-year-old with serious dark eyes, and our youngest boy, Mateo." The 5-year-old peeked out from behind Diego's shoulder, thumb firmly planted in his mouth. "And this little one is Lucia," Isabella said, bouncing the baby gently. "She's been fussy on the bus, but she's usually pretty good." Marcus found himself cataloging details without meaning. Tio. The way Elena's hand automatically smoothed Mateo's hair as she spoke. How Miguel stood straighter when introduced, as if trying to prove he could be the man of the family if needed. The fact that all their clothes were clean, but clearly secondhand, mended with careful stitches and faded from multiple washings. "Let's get you all loaded up," he said, moving toward the pile of luggage the bus driver had deposited on the sidewalk. "It's about a 40-minute drive to the ranch." The luggage told its own story. 2 large suitcases held together with duct tape, several garbage bags that appeared to contain clothes, a diaper bag decorated with cartoon characters, and an assortment of backpacks and grocery bags. Everything they owned in the world, Marcus realized, could fit in the bed of his pickup truck with room to spare. Elena began organizing the seating, arrangements with military precision. "Isabella, you take the baby in the front seat. Miguel, you're by the window behind Mr. Thompson. Twins in the middle, Diego by the other window, and Mateo on my lap." "It's Marcus," he said as he hoisted one of the suitcases into the truck bed. "Mr. Thompson makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and teaching school." Sofia or Carmen, he wasn't sure which was which yet, giggled at this, then clapped her hand over her mouth as if surprised by the sound. Elena's face softened slightly, and he caught a glimpse of what she might look like when she wasn't carrying the weight of 8 people's futures on her shoulders. The drive started quietly, broken only by the baby's occasional babbling and the twins whispering to each other in Spanish. Marcus found himself stealing glances in the rearview mirror, watching Elena point out landmarks through the window to Mateo, who had abandoned his thumb long enough to press his nose against the glass. "Those are called buttes," she was saying as they passed a cluster of flat-topped hills. "Like little mountains with their tops cut off. Did giants cut them?" Mateo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," Elena said seriously. "What? Do you think, Marcus? Could giants have cut the tops off those mountains?" It took him a moment to realize she was including him in the conversation, treating him not as a stranger providing transportation, but as someone whose opinion mattered to the children. "Well," he said, considering the question with the gravity it deserved, "I always figured it was more likely to be dinosaurs. They were pretty big, and they might have needed flat places to build their houses." This sparked a debate between the twins about whether dinosaurs lived in houses or caves, with Diego offering the authoritative opinion that different kinds of dinosaurs probably had different kinds of homes. Even Miguel cracked a smile when Mateo wondered aloud if the dinosaur houses had dinosaur furniture. As they turned off the main highway onto the dirt road that led to his ranch, Marcus noticed Elena studying the landscape with an expression he couldn't quite read. The late afternoon sun turned the prairie grass golden, and the mountains rose in the distance like purple promises, but he tried to see it through her eyes, remote, isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor, let alone a school or grocery store. "It's Beautiful, she said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Different from New Mexico, but beautiful. It can get pretty lonesome out here, he admitted, especially in winter. The snow can cut us off from town for days at a time. Isabella shifted the baby to her other arm and looked at him in the rearview mirror. We're used to taking care of each other, she said simply. Distance doesn't scare us as much as some other things. There was a story there, Marcus realized. In the careful way she spoke and the glances the older children exchanged. Whatever had brought this family to his doorstep involved more than just their parents' deaths. They carried themselves like people who'd learned not to trust easily, who'd been disappointed by promises before. The ranch house came into view as they created the final hill, and Marcus tried to see it fresh. The cedar siding that needed staining. The front porch that sagged slightly on one end. The barn that had weathered decades of Montana seasons. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was solid and warm and had room for however many people needed shelter. Is that your house? Mateo asked, his voice filled with wonder. It's going to be all of our house, Alina said carefully. If Mr. Marcus doesn't mind sharing it with a bunch of kids who sometimes forget to wipe their feet. Marcus, he corrected again, pulling up beside the front steps. And I haven't had to worry about muddy footprints in a long time. Might be nice to have a reason to. As he turned off the engine, the silence that settled over the truck felt different from his usual solitude. It was full of potential energy, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air itself seems to hold its breath. 7 children and 1 woman were about to walk into his house, bringing with them voices and laughter and probably chaos. And his carefully ordered world was about to become something entirely unpredictable. Alina opened her door and stepped down, then helped Mateo to the ground. The other children climbed out more slowly, standing in a cluster by the truck as they took in their new surroundings. The baby had fallen asleep in Isabella's arms, and the 15-year-old swayed gently to keep her settled. It's so quiet, Miguel observed, and Marcus realized that for children who'd grown up in cities, the absence of traffic and sirens and human noise might feel strange rather than peaceful. You'll hear plenty once you get used to it, Marcus said, pulling their luggage from the truck bed. Coyotes singing at night, owls calling, cattle lowing when they want their feed. Different kinds of noise, but it's there. Diego immediately perked up. There are coyotes, real ones? Real ones, Marcus confirmed. They usually stay away from the house, but you might see them out in the fields at dusk. They're beautiful animals, but they're wild, so we always keep our distance. He led them up the front steps, fishing his keys from his pocket with hands that weren't quite steady. The house had been his sanctuary for 3 years, the place where he'd learned to live with loss and silence. Now he was opening it to people who would fill it with sound and movement and needs he wasn't sure he remembered how to meet. The front door swung open on the living room. He'd spent the week trying to make welcoming. He'd moved Sarah's piano bench against the wall and put away the few photographs that might raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. The space looked larger somehow with the furniture rearranged, more like a place where children might play and less like a museum to his former life. Elena stepped inside first, her eyes taking in the comfortable furniture, the fireplace with its stone hearth, the windows that looked out across the valley. It's lovely, she said, and he could tell she meant it. You have a beautiful home. The children followed more cautiously, staying close to Elena and each other as they explored this new space. The twins gravitated toward the piano, running their fingers silently over the keys without pressing them. Miguel examined the bookshelves with interest, while Diego went straight to the windows to peer out at the barn and the fields beyond. Are you hungry? Marcus asked, suddenly aware that they'd been traveling all day and might not have eaten. I've got sandwich stuff, or I could start some soup. We ate on the bus, Alina said, but Mateo tugged at her sweater and whispered something. In her ear, she smiled. Well, maybe just something small. It's been a long day. As Marcus moved toward the kitchen, he could hear the children's voices growing slightly louder, more relaxed as they began to claim space in the house. Someone was asking about the bathroom. Someone else wanted to know if they could see the horses, and through it all, Elena's voice provided gentle guidance and reassurance. For the first time in 3 years, his house sounded like a home, the first. Night passed in a series of careful negotiations and unspoken boundaries. Marcus had given Elena and the baby the master bedroom, moving his own belongings to the small office that had once been Sarah's craft room. Isabella and the twins shared the larger guest room, while the boys crowded into what had been his storage room, now hastily cleared and furnished with sleeping bags and an air mattress he'd found in the basement. Sleep came fitfully for everyone. Marcus lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, the soft murmur of Elena's voice soothing baby Lucia, footsteps in the hallway as children made trips to the bathroom, whispered conversations in Spanish that carried emotional undertones he couldn't translate but somehow understood. The house itself seemed to be adjusting, creaking and settling in new ways as it accommodated 8 additional heartbeats. Morning arrived with the kind of chaos Marcus had forgotten existed. Children emerged from bedrooms at different times, some clearly early risers while others had to be coaxed from sleep by Elena's gentle persistence. The single bathroom became a source of polite but increasingly urgent negotiations, with Isabella taking charge of the schedule with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to manage limited resources. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter, making coffee and watching the choreography of a large family getting ready for the day. Elena moved among the children with practiced grace, braiding hair, checking that faces were washed, mediating a dispute between Diego and Miguel over who got to use the bathroom sink first. She wore the same jeans from yesterday but had changed into a faded blue t-shirt that made her eyes look almost green in the morning light. "I hope we didn't keep you awake," she said, accepting the mug of coffee he offered with a grateful smile. "Lucia's teething, and she's not sleeping well. It'll get better once she adjusts to the new place." "Didn't bother me," Marcus lied, though in truth the sounds hadn't been bothersome so much as foreign. He'd grown so accustomed to silence that even pleasant noise felt overwhelming. "You want some breakfast?" "I've got eggs, bacon, cereal." "We don't want to impose," Elena said automatically, the response of someone who'd learned not to expect too much from others' generosity. "We brought some things." Before he could protest, she was directing the older children to retrieve grocery bags from their luggage, producing boxes of generic cereal, a loaf of bread that had seen better days, and a jar of peanut butter with about 2 spoonfuls left in the bottom. It was clear they'd spent their last few dollars on bus tickets, keeping only enough food to make it through the journey. "Put that away," Marcus said, more gruffly than he'd intended. When Elena's face immediately shuddered, he softened his tone. "I mean, save it for later. I've got plenty here, and breakfast is the most important meal of the day, especially for kids." He busied himself pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, aware that all 8 sets of eyes were watching his every move. The children had arranged themselves around the kitchen table with the careful spacing of people who'd learned to make themselves small, to take up as little room as possible. Only Mateo seemed truly relaxed, swinging his legs from his chair and humming tunelessly under his breath. "Do you like pancakes?" Marcus asked the room in general and was rewarded with the first genuine excitement he'd seen from the group. "Real pancakes?" Sophia asked, then immediately looked embarrassed by her enthusiasm. "From scratch pancakes," Marcus confirmed, pulling out his grandmother's cast iron griddle. "My wife used to make them every Sunday. I'm not as good as she was, but they're edible." As he mixed batter, he became aware of the subtle ways the family was mapping their new environment. Miguel had positioned himself where he could see both the front door and the back entrance, his body language suggesting he was always ready to move quickly if needed. Isabella kept the baby close, never setting her down even when Lucia dozed, as if afraid someone might take her away. The twins stayed within arm's reach of each other, communicating in looks and gestures that suggested they developed their own private language. Elena moved around the kitchen with careful efficiency, finding plates and glasses without asking where they were kept, wiping up spills before he noticed them, orchestrating the children's behavior with subtle hand signals and meaningful glances. She was trying to make their presence as unobtrusive as possible, he realized, treating his home like a temporary shelter rather than a place where they might belong. "You don't have to tiptoe around," he said as he flipped the first batch of pancakes. "This is your home now, remember? Kids are supposed to make noise." "We're not used to having much space," Elena replied carefully. "In our last place, we had to be quiet so we wouldn't bother the neighbors." There was a story there, Marcus sensed, in the way Diego immediately straightened at the mention of their previous living situation and how Isabella's grip on the baby tightened almost imperceptibly. He filed the observation away, focusing instead on the task at hand. The pancakes were a success, disappearing from plates almost as quickly as he could make them. Mateo ate with the single-minded focus of a child who'd learned not to waste food, while the twins took careful, appreciative bites and pronounced them better than restaurant pancakes, which made Marcus unexpectedly proud. After breakfast, the delicate dance of figuring out how to occupy their time began. Elena immediately started clearing dishes, despite his protests, while the older children gathered their siblings and began what appeared to be a well-rehearsed routine of quiet activities, designed to keep everyone occupied without causing trouble. "We could explore the ranch," Marcus suggested, pulling on his work jacket. "See the barn, check on the cattle, if anyone's interested." The response was immediate and enthusiastic, though carefully controlled. Diego's eyes lit up at the mention of cattle, while Miguel asked if there were really horses like Elena had mentioned. Even Isabella seemed intrigued, though she quickly masked her interest behind responsible concern about whether the baby should be outside in the morning chill. "Fresh air's good for babies," Marcus said, remembering something Sarah used to say, "Just bundle her up." The tour of the ranch became an education for all of them. Marcus found himself seeing his property through children's eyes, pointing out details he'd long taken for granted. The way the barn swallows had built their nests in the rafters, coming back to the same spots year after year. The old root cellar where his grandfather had stored vegetables through the winter. The creek that ran along the back pasture, still running clear despite the dry summer. The children asked questions with the careful politeness of those who'd learned that adult patience was a limited resource, but their genuine curiosity began to show through as the morning progressed. Diego wanted to know everything about the cattle, how many there were, what they ate, why some had spots and others didn't. Sophia and Carmen were fascinated by the chickens Marcus kept for eggs, giggling when the hens clucked disapprovingly. At their approach, Miguel gravitated toward the equipment shed, running his hands over the tractor with something approaching reverence. "My dad used to work construction," he said quietly. "He taught me about engines before ... He trailed off, but Marcus understood. "Want to see how this one runs?" Marcus asked, climbing up into the cab. "It's older than you are, but it still starts every time." The sound of the engine turning over brought smiles to several faces, and Marcus found himself explaining how the different levers worked, what each gauge measured, how the implement attachments could be changed for different jobs. Miguel absorbed every word, asking intelligent questions that suggested he'd inherited his father's mechanical aptitude. Elena walked beside them through the tour, carrying baby Lucia and keeping a watchful eye on the younger children, but Marcus caught her studying the landscape with an expression he couldn't quite read. She seemed to be calculating something: distances, perhaps, or resources, or the 1,000 practical considerations that came with managing such a large family in an unfamiliar place. The school bus comes out this far?" she asked as they walked past the end of his driveway. "It does during the school year," Marcus confirmed. "Picks up at 7:30, brings them back around 4. It's a 40-minute ride each way, but the driver's good about waiting if the weather's bad." Isabella looked up from where she was helping Mateo pet one of the barn cats. "When does school start here?" "Next Monday," Marcus said, suddenly realizing they'd arrived just in time for the new academic year. "I should probably call and get everyone registered. They'll need to know what grades you're all in." The mention of school created a subtle shift in the group's energy. The children exchanged glances that spoke of previous experiences with new schools, new teachers, and the challenge of being the outsiders who didn't know the unwritten rules. Elena's expression tightened slightly, and Marcus recognized the look of a parent calculating cost school supplies, clothes that fit properly, the 100 small expenses that came with education. "We'll figure it out," she said, the same phrase she seemed to use when faced with any obstacle. It was becoming clear that Elena Martinez was someone who'd learned to make things work through sheer determination, even when the odds were stacked. Against her dot as they made their way back toward the house, Marcus found himself studying the family dynamics with growing interest. Isabella was clearly the second in command, old enough to help with decision-making, but young enough to still need guidance. Miguel occupied an interesting middle ground, wanting to be helpful but unsure of his role in this new environment. The twins operated as a unit, sharing responsibilities and supporting each other with an efficiency that suggested they'd learned early to be self-sufficient. Diego was the observer, taking in everything but commenting little while Mateo remained the baby of the group despite his 5 years, still needing extra attention and reassurance. And through it all, Elena orchestrated their movements with the subtle skill of a conductor, keeping everyone safe and accounted for while trying not to be too obvious about her constant vigilance stop by lunchtime. The initial awkwardness was beginning to fade, replaced by a cautious comfort that suggested they might actually be able to make this arrangement work. The children had found spots around the house that seemed to call to them. Miguel at the kitchen table, working on a puzzle he'd found in a closet. The twins curled up with picture books in the living room. Diego at the window, watching the cattle in the distance. But Marcus also noticed the things they didn't do. No one touched the piano, despite obvious interest from the twins. Nobody claimed a favorite chair or asked to change the channel on the television. They moved through the house like respectful guests, careful not to disturb anything that might belong to its real owner. Over sandwiches and soup, Elena began to outline some practical considerations. "I need to find work," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "I have some savings, but not much, and I can't expect you to support all of us." "What kind of work did you do before?" Marcus asked. "Housekeeping, mostly. Some restaurant work. I'm good. With my hands I can clean, cook, do alterations and repairs." She paused, glancing at the children. "The problem is finding something that works around their schedules. Isabella can help with the younger ones, but she's got her own schoolwork to worry about." Marcus considered this. The ranch generated enough income to support his simple lifestyle, but adding 8 people to his expenses would strain his budget. On the other hand, Elena's presence might actually make some things easier. The house was cleaner than it had been in months, and the meal she'd prepared the night before had been better than anything he'd eaten in weeks. "We'll work something out," he said, echoing her phrase from earlier. "Maybe something part-time in town, or we could look into work you could do from here. There are always people needing alterations, and some of the ranch wives might need help with big cleaning jobs." The relief on her face was subtle but unmistakable. It occurred to him that Elena Martinez had been carrying a tremendous burden. Entirely alone, responsible not just for her own future, but for the futures of 7 children who depended on her completely. The weight of that responsibility showed in the careful way she considered every decision, the constant calculations running behind her eyes. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself paying attention to the small revelations that emerged through ordinary interactions. The way Elena automatically cut Mateo's sandwich into triangles without being asked suggested she'd been caring for him since he was very small. Isabella's knowledge of exactly how many diapers baby Lucia used in a day spoke to real experience with infant care. Miguel's careful attention to whether the younger children had everything they needed showed he'd stepped into a protective role that was probably both natural and necessary. These weren't children who'd been suddenly thrust together by circumstance. They were a family unit that had been forged by shared experience and mutual dependence, with Elena as their anchor and Isabella as her lieutenant. Marcus was the outsider here, the one who needed to figure out how to fit into their established patterns rather than expecting them to adapt entirely to his. The realization was both humbling and oddly reassuring. He'd been worried about his ability to suddenly become responsible for so many lives, but it was becoming clear that this family had already learned to take care of itself. What they needed from him wasn't parenting so much as stability, a safe place to land, and the security of knowing they wouldn't be moved along again just when they started to settle in. As evening approached and the children began to show signs of travel fatigue, Marcus found himself looking forward to the quiet rituals of bedtime, to learning the particular needs and preferences that would help these strangers become familiar. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and adjustments, but tonight, for the first time in 3 years, his house would be full of the sounds of family life. It wasn't the family he'd planned for, but perhaps it was the family he needed. The second week brought the rhythm of school days, and with it, the first real test of their makeshift family arrangement. Marcus found himself driving the long route to town 3 times on the first Monday, once to register the children, once to return with forgotten lunchboxes, and a third time when Mateo had what the school nurse diplomatically called separation anxiety and needed to be picked up early. Elena had ridden along for the registration process, armed with manila folders containing birth certificates, immunization records, and carefully written explanations of each child's academic history. She sat in the principal's office with the controlled composure of someone who'd learned that bureaucracy could be either a helpful tool or an insurmountable obstacle, depending on how you approached it. The children have been through several school changes, she explained to Mrs. Henderson, the elementary principal, while Marcus filled out emergency contact forms. They're good students, but they might need some time to adjust. Mrs. Henderson, a grandmother herself, had seen enough displaced children to recognize the signs. She assigned the twins to Mrs. Garcia's 3rd grade class, knowing that having a Spanish-speaking teacher might ease their transition. Diego went to 5th grade with Mr. Peterson, who had a reputation for patience with quiet students. Mateo, despite his small size, tested into kindergarten, though Elena requested he start with half-days until he felt more secure. Miguel and Isabella presented different challenges. Miguel's test scores placed him in advanced classes, but his reading level lagged behind his math abilities, a common pattern for children whose education had been interrupted. Isabella, at 15, was academically ready for 10th grade, but had never stayed in one school long enough to accumulate the credits she needed to graduate on time. "We'll work with them," the high school counselor assured Elena. "Montana's good about finding flexible solutions for students in unique situations." On the drive home, Marcus noticed how Elena relaxed incrementally as each hurdle was cleared. Her shoulders dropped from their defensive position, and she actually smiled when Diego announced he liked his new teacher because she had a fish tank in the classroom. "1 week down," she murmured to Marcus as they pulled into the driveway. "If they can make it through the first week without any major incidents, they usually settle in okay." The major incident came on Wednesday, though not from the quarter anyone expected. Marcus was repairing a fence line in the back pasture when he heard raised voices from the direction of the house. By the time he jogged back, he found Elena on the front porch, locked in what appeared to be a heated discussion with a woman he didn't recognize, a blonde in an expensive SUV, who was gesturing aggressively while speaking into his cell phone. "Told you people before, this is not an appropriate placement for this many children," the woman was saying. "The county has procedures, and this arrangement hasn't been properly vetted." Marcus climbed the porch steps, noting how Elena had positioned herself squarely in front of the front door and how several small faces were visible at the windows behind her. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he considered the woman's presence unwelcome. "I'm Brenda Stillwater from Child Protective Services," the woman replied, finally ending her phone call. "We received a report about unsupervised children living in an unlicensed foster situation. I need to speak with the legal guardian and inspect the living conditions." Elena's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "The children are with me by court order from New Mexico. I have all the paperwork. This is a private family arrangement, not a foster placement. Nevertheless, Montana has jurisdiction now that you're residents, and we need to ensure the children's safety and welfare." Miss Stillwater's gaze swept over the ranch house, taking in the peeling paint and the toys scattered on the porch with obvious disapproval. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen enough bureaucratic interference during Sarah's final illness to recognize the type people who wielded regulations like weapons and confused procedure with caring. "Who made this report?" he asked. "That's confidential. But I understand there are 7 children living here with 2 unmarried adults, and no one has verified that this is an appropriate environment." "The children are safe, healthy, and attending school," Elena said, her accent thickening slightly with stress. "What more verification do you need?" The inspection that followed felt like a violation. Miss Stillwater moved through the house with a clipboard, making notes about sleeping arrangements, asking pointed questions about supervision and discipline, and photographing the children's bedroom spaces with clinical detachment. The children themselves sat in the living room under Isabella's watchful eye, their earlier comfort in the house evaporating under official scrutiny. Marcus trailed behind the social worker, answering questions about his background check status. None, his relationship to the children complicated, and his understanding of child welfare regulations minimal. With each exchange, it became clearer that their informal arrangement, which had felt natural and necessary, looked questionable when viewed through the lens of institutional oversight. "I'll need to file a preliminary report," Miss Stillwater announced as she prepared to leave. "There may be additional visits while we determine the appropriate course of action. In the meantime, I strongly recommend that you consider more conventional arrangements for these children's care." After her SUV disappeared down the drive, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Elena sat heavily on the porch steps, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to reassemble the scattered papers from her folders. The children had dispersed to various corners, their carefully rebuilt sense of security damaged by the reminder that their life could be disrupted at any adult's whim. "Who would have called them?" Marcus asked, settling beside Elena on the steps. "Could be anyone," she replied tiredly. "People see a bunch of kids who don't look like they belong. They make assumptions. Maybe someone at the school, maybe a neighbor who thinks they're being helpful." Marcus thought of the few neighbors close enough to have opinions. The Johnsons 3 miles south, the elderly Kowalski couple to the east. Neither seemed like the type to cause trouble, but then again, he'd been isolated long enough that he might have misjudged. "What happens now?" he asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching the cattle graze in the distance. "Now we prove that we're doing right by these kids," she said finally. "We document everything, keep every receipt, make sure the house passes whatever inspections they want to throw at us. And we hope it's enough." That evening, the family meeting that Elena called felt different from their usual dinner conversations. She laid out the situation honestly, explaining that some adult had decided to question their living arrangement and that they might have more visits from officials. "It's not because you did anything wrong," she assured them. "It's because some people think families have to look a certain way, and we don't fit their picture. Will we have to leave?" Sophia asked, voicing the fear that was written on every face. "Not if I can help it," Elena replied firmly. "But we might need to be extra careful for a while. Make sure homework gets done, chores get finished, everyone follows the rules." Isabella, ever practical, asked about the legal aspects. "Do we need a lawyer? Should we start looking for backup places to go?" Marcus found himself speaking before he'd fully thought through the implications. "Nobody's going anywhere," he said. "This is your home now, and if some bureaucrat thinks they can break up this family, they're going to have a fight on their hands." The relief on the children's faces made his chest tight. These kids had been bounced around enough, had their stability threatened too many times. Whatever it took to keep them together and safe, he was prepared to do it. The crisis, unexpectedly, became a catalyst for deeper connection. Over the following days, Marcus found himself more involved in the daily rhythms of the household, not just as a provider of space and resources, but as an active participant in family life. He helped Miguel with algebra homework, discovering that the boy had a natural aptitude for mathematics that had been overlooked in previous schools. He learned to braid Sophia's hair when Elena was busy with the baby, though his attempts were clumsy compared to Isabella's expert plaits. Elena, meanwhile, began to let her guard down in small but noticeable ways. She asked his opinion about discipline. When Diego tested boundaries by skipping his chores, she included him in conversations about the children's needs and schedules, instead of simply informing him of decisions she'd already made. Most surprisingly, she accepted his offer to drive the children to their various after-school activities, trusting him with their safety and well-being in a way that spoke of growing confidence in his commitment. The breakthrough moment came unexpectedly, triggered by something as mundane as a broken washing machine. Marcus was under the kitchen sink, trying to diagnose a drainage problem, when he heard the distinctive sound of mechanical failure from the laundry room, a grinding noise followed by ominous silence. "Perfect," Elena muttered from the doorway. Baby Lucia balanced on her hip. 7 kids generate a lot of laundry, and we can't afford a repairman right now." Marcus emerged from under the sink, wiping his hands on a towel. "Let me take a look. I'm better with machines than plumbing." The washing machine was indeed dead, its motor burned out beyond his ability to repair. As he explained the problem to Elena, he watched her mentally calculate the cost of replacement versus the possibility of hand-washing clothes for 9 people. Her face showed the kind of resignation that came from too many small defeats accumulating into major problems. "We'll figure something out," she said, the phrase that was becoming her automatic response to any obstacle. "Maybe there's a laundromat in town." "There is," Marcus said, "but it's expensive and time-consuming, especially with this many people." He paused, considering, what if we went shopping for a replacement instead? "I've been meaning to update some of the appliances anyway." Elena's immediate response was to decline, to insist they couldn't accept such a generous gift, that they'd already imposed too much. But before she could voice the objections, Miguel appeared in the doorway with a suggestion that surprised everyone. "What if I got a part-time job?" he asked. "I'm almost 13, and Mrs. Patterson at the hardware store said she could use help after school and weekends. I could earn money for family expenses." The offer was so earnest, so mature beyond his years, that it broke something open in the adults listening. Here was a 12-year-old boy ready to sacrifice his childhood to ease his family's financial burden, and the generosity of it was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "Miguel, honey," Elena began, but Marcus held up a hand. "That's a responsible offer," he said seriously, "and I respect you for making it. But part of being in a family is that the adults handle the big expenses so the kids can focus on being kids. If you want to work at the hardware store because you'd enjoy it, that's one thing. but you don't need to worry about washing machines. The shopping trip that followed became an unexpected adventure. Marcus had forgotten how much energy children brought to mundane errands, how a simple trip to the appliance store could become an educational experience when filtered through curious young minds. Diego wanted to understand how the different cycles worked, while the twins debated the merits of top-loading versus front-loading designs with the seriousness of engineering consultants. Elena moved through the store with careful attention to price tags and energy efficiency ratings, but Marcus noticed how she also considered features that would make laundry easier with such a large family: extra capacity, multiple temperature settings, a gentle cycle for baby clothes. When she thought he wasn't looking, she ran her hand over the surface of a mid-range model with an expression of quiet longing. "This one," Marcus announced, pointing to the machine she'd been admiring. "When can you deliver it?" The arguments that followed were spirited, but brief. Elena insisted on at least contributing to the cost, pulling a small roll of bills from her purse with the careful movements of someone who'd counted every dollar multiple times. Marcus accepted a token payment that covered perhaps 10% of the actual price, understanding that her dignity required some financial participation in the decision. "We're partners in this," he told her as they arranged delivery for the next day. "Partners share expenses and responsibilities. That's how it works." The word partners seemed to settle something for Elena. Not romantic partners, not yet, but true collaborators in the complex project of raising 7 children and building a life together. The distinction mattered, establishing a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose that felt more solid than mere charity or convenience. That night, as the children fell asleep to the familiar sounds of their new home, Marcus found Elena on the front porch, wrapped in one of Sarah's old sweaters and looking out at the star-filled sky. He joined her on the steps, noting how natural it felt to share the comfortable silence. "Thank you," she said finally. "Not just for the washing machine, but for making Miguel feel heard without making him feel responsible for problems that aren't his to solve." "He's a good kid," Marcus replied. "They all are. You've done something remarkable with them." Elena was quiet for a moment, then surprised him with a soft laugh. "Some days I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm making it up as I go along, hoping I don't mess them up too badly." "That's what all parents do," Marcus said, remembering his own fears during the brief time he and Sarah had tried to conceive. "Love them, do your best, and hope it's enough." The conversation that followed was the most personal they'd shared since her arrival. Elena talked about the overwhelming responsibility of suddenly becoming a mother to 7 children, about the nights she lay awake, wondering if she was making the right choices, about the guilty relief she felt at having someone to share the burden. Marcus found himself sharing his own fears about being too set in his ways, about whether he could learn to be the kind of man these children needed, about the possibility that his heart might be too damaged by loss to properly love again. "Hearts are more resilient than we think," Elena said softly. "They can hold more than we imagine, love more than we expect. These kids have taught me that." As they sat together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch and the distant murmur of children's voices through open windows, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer strangers navigating a temporary arrangement, but 2 people who'd chosen to build something together, a family that existed not because of biology or law, but because of intention and commitment. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was beginning to feel like the life they were meant to live. The call came at 3:17 in the morning, jarring Marcus from the deepest sleep he'd experienced in months. The phone's shrill ring cut through the darkness, and his first groggy thought was that something had happened to one of the children. But the voice on the other end belonged to Sheriff Tom Bradley, a man Marcus had known since high school. "Marcus, I'm sorry to wake you, but we've got Elena Martinez here at the station. She's asking for you to come down." Marcus sat up instantly. Alert. What happened? Is she hurt? She's not hurt, but she's in trouble. We arrested her about 2 hours ago on an outstanding warrant from New Mexico. Something about check fraud. She didn't want to call until she was sure the kids were settled for the night. The words hit Marcus like cold water. Check fraud. An outstanding warrant. Elena, who counted every dollar twice and mended clothes instead of buying new ones, was sitting in a jail cell while 7 children slept peacefully in his house, unaware that their world was about to shatter again. "I'm on my way," Marcus said, already reaching for his clothes. The drive to town passed in a blur of gravel roads and unanswered questions. How long had Elena known about this warrant? Was this why they'd left New Mexico so suddenly? And most pressing of all, what would happen to the children if she couldn't come home? The Millerville Sheriff's Department occupied a small brick building next to the courthouse, its fluorescent lights harsh against the prey-dawn darkness. Sheriff Bradley met Marcus at the front desk, his expression grim but sympathetic. "She's been cooperative," he said, leading Marcus down a short hallway. "Hasn't asked for a lawyer yet, but she's been asking about the kids every 10 minutes. The warrant's 2 years old. Apparently she wrote some bad checks when her sister was dying. Medical bills that her insurance wouldn't cover." They stopped in front of a holding cell where Elena sat on a narrow bench, still wearing the jeans and sweater she'd put on for yesterday's grocery run. Her hair had escaped its braid, and her face showed the particular exhaustion that came from trying to hold everything together when the foundation kept shifting. "Marcus," she said, standing quickly when she saw him. "Thank God. Are the children okay? Did they wake up?" "Isabella knows what to do if—" "The children are fine," Marcus interrupted gently. "They're still asleep. What's this about, Elena?" The story that emerged was heartbreaking in its familiarity. Elena's sister Maria had been diagnosed with leukemia when her youngest child, baby Lucia, was only 3 months old. The family had health insurance, but it didn't cover experimental treatments, second opinions, or the countless small expenses that accumulated during a terminal illness. Elena had exhausted her savings and taken a second job, but it hadn't been enough. Maria was getting better, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. The new treatment was working, and the doctor said she might have years left. I wrote checks for her medicine, for groceries when she couldn't work, for gas money to get to appointments. I thought I could cover them when my next paycheck came. But Maria had taken a sudden turn for the worse, dying within a week of what everyone thought was a routine checkup. Elena had suddenly found herself responsible for 7 grieving children and a mountain of debt, including several returned checks that she couldn't afford to make good. I tried to pay them back, she continued. I called the stores, explained what happened, and asked if I could set up payment plans. Most of them were understanding, but one of the managers decided to press charges. Said I was just another deadbeat trying to scam the system. Sheriff Bradley consulted his paperwork. The total amount is $347.82, plus fees and penalties. New Mexico wants her extradited, but we can hold her for up to 72 hours while they decide whether it's worth the expense. $347. Marcus thought of the washing machine he'd bought without a second thought, of the hundreds of dollars he'd spent on groceries and school supplies over the past month. Less than $400 was going to tear apart the fragile family. They'd been building. What are her options? Marcus asked. She can fight extradition, but that means staying in jail until the hearing, which could take weeks. Or she can agree to go back to New Mexico voluntarily and try to resolve it there. Either way, she's not going home tonight. Marcus looked at Elena, seeing the defeat in her shoulders, the way she'd already begun the mental process of preparing for another upheaval. She'd been through this before the sudden disruption, the need to quickly arrange care for the children, the scramble to salvage what she could from another collapsed situation. Can I pay the amount owed? He asked. Sheriff Bradley looked surprised. You can try, but it's not that simple. The warrant is for a criminal offense, not a civil debt. Even if you paid every penny, the state might still want to prosecute. But it would help her case? Probably. Shows good faith, indicates she's not trying to dodge responsibility. Marcus turned to Elena. Do you have contact information for the prosecutor's office in New Mexico? Someone who might be willing to discuss a resolution. Marcus, no, Elena said firmly. You can't keep fixing our problems with your money. This is my mess and I need to deal with it. It's our mess, Marcus corrected. We're partners, remember? Partners don't let each other face things alone. The next several hours passed in a flurry of phone calls and negotiations. Marcus spent the dawn hours in Sheriff Bradley's office, speaking with prosecutors, court clerks, and legal aid attorneys. Across 3 time zones. Elena's case wasn't unique. The New Mexico legal system dealt with similar situations regularly, and most prosecutors were willing to be reasonable when restitution was offered promptly. The breakthrough came when Marcus reached Assistant District Attorney Carmen Valdez, a woman who understood the complexities of families in crisis. She reviewed Elena's file while Marcus waited on hold, noting that this was Elena's first offense and that the circumstances involved medical debt and sudden family tragedy. If she can make full restitution plus court costs and agrees to a year of supervised probation, I'm willing to recommend a suspended sentence, Ms. Valdez said. She'd need to return to New Mexico for sentencing, but she wouldn't have to serve jail time unless she violated probation. The total came to $847.23, including fees, penalties, and court costs. Marcus gave his credit card information without hesitation, understanding that this payment represented more than money. It was buying Elena's freedom and the children's stability. By the time Elena was released at 10:30 that morning, the crisis had become something else entirely. As they drove home through the familiar landscape, Marcus found himself thinking not about the money he'd spent, but about the conversation he'd had with Ms. Valdez about families and second chances. You didn't have to do that, Elena said quietly, watching the ranch house come into view. Yes, I did, Marcus replied. Those children have lost enough. They don't need to lose you too over something that happened when you were trying to save your sister's life. The children were waiting on the front porch, having been told only that Elena had to take care of some business in town early that morning. Isabella held baby Lucia while the younger ones pressed around. Elena with the desperate affection of those who'd learned that adults could disappear without warning. Everything's fine, Elena assured them, though Marcus could see the strain in her face, just some paperwork that needed to be sorted out. But children who'd experienced loss could read the signs that adults tried to hide. Over the following days, Marcus noticed the subtle changes in behavior, the way Miguel checked on Elena's location more frequently, how the twins stayed closer to the house instead of exploring the far pastures, how even confident Isabella seemed, more reluctant to let the baby out of her sight. The real test came when Elena sat them all down that evening and explained, in age-appropriate terms, that she needed to return to New Mexico briefly to resolve a legal issue from their previous life. It's about some checks I wrote when your mom was sick, she told them honestly. I have to go talk to a judge and promise to be more careful about money, but I'll come back. This is our home now. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. These children had heard promises before, had trusted adults who'd failed them, had learned that circumstances could change without warning and sweep away everything they'd built. It was Mateo who finally voiced what they were all thinking. What if they don't let you come back? Elena gathered him onto her lap, looking around at the circle of faces, some defiant, some resigned, all carrying the particular wariness of children who'd been disappointed too often. Then Marcus will take care of you until I can get back. She said simply, we've already talked about it. You're not going anywhere, and neither am I if I can help it. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. 7 children asking direct questions about legal procedures, contingency plans, and worst-case scenarios with the matter-of-fact acceptance of those who'd learned early that life rarely went according to plan. Isabella wanted to know about guardianship papers and emergency contacts. Miguel asked about school enrollment and whether his grades would transfer if they had to move again. The twins worried about their clothes and toys, while Diego wondered if the cattle would remember him if Elena was gone for a long time. Marcus found himself making promises he wasn't entirely sure he could keep, but meaning every word. Yes, he would stay with them if Elena couldn't come back immediately. Yes, they could keep going to their current schools. Yes, this would always be their home, regardless of what happened with the legal system. But it was Elena's response to 5-year-old Mateo that crystallized something fundamental about the family they'd become. When the little boy asked if she loved them enough to come back, even if it was hard, Elena didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. "I love you enough to face whatever I have to face," she said seriously. "Even scary judges and courthouse, buildings and people who think they know what's best for us. You're my family, and families fight for each other." The week that followed Elena's departure for New Mexico passed slowly. Marcus discovered that managing 7 children alone required skills he'd never developed, from coordinating bathroom schedules to mediating disputes over television channels. Isabella stepped into Elena's role with efficiency that was both helpful and heartbreaking, clearly accustomed to taking on adult responsibilities when circumstances demanded it. But something unexpected happened during Elena's absence. The children began to turn to Marcus not just for practical needs, but for comfort and guidance. Diego brought him a school assignment that was giving him trouble. Sofia asked for help braiding her hair in the complicated pattern Elena usually managed. Miguel offered to help with ranch chores, not out of obligation, but from genuine interest in learning skills that might be useful. Most surprisingly, baby Lucia began reaching for Marcus when she was fussy, accepting comfort from him in a way that suggested she was beginning to see him as family rather than just another adult in her orbit. The phone calls from New Mexico were brief but reassuring. Elena's court appearance had gone smoothly, the judge accepting the plea agreement and expressing approval for the restitution that had already been made. The supervised probation could be transferred to Montana, meaning Elena could return home while still meeting her legal obligations. But on Thursday night, 3 days after Elena was scheduled to return, Marcus received a call that made his blood run cold. "Marcus, it's me." Elena's voice was tight with stress. "There's been a complication. Maria's ex-husband has filed for custody of the 3 youngest children. He says I'm not a suitable guardian because of the criminal conviction, and he wants them placed with him immediately." The silence stretched between them as Marcus processed this information. Elena's sister's ex-husband, a man who'd walked away from his children after Maria's diagnosis, was now using Elena's legal troubles as grounds to claim children he'd shown no interest in supporting. "What does this mean?" Marcus asked. "It means I might not be coming home," Elena said, her voice breaking slightly. "My lawyer says we have to fight it, but custody battles can take months, and I can't leave the state while it's pending. And, Marcus, I can't ask you to take care of my family indefinitely while I fight a battle I might not win." The crisis that had seemed resolved was suddenly deeper and more threatening than ever. Not only was Elena trapped in New Mexico, but the legal system was actively working to break apart the family they'd all come to love. Marcus looked out at the ranch house, where lights glowed warmly in the children's bedrooms, and Isabella was probably reading bedtime stories to her younger siblings. 7 children who'd finally found stability and safety, who'd started to trust that this time might be different, were about to face another upheaval that could scatter them permanently. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice carrying a determination that surprised even him, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Those children are not going anywhere. This is their home, and you are their family, and we're going to fight for both of those things with everything we have." The silence on the other end of the line told him that Alina was crying, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "How?" she whispered. "How do we fight a system that sees only what's broken instead of what's working?" Marcus looked out at the land that had been his sanctuary and was now home to the family he'd never expected to find. The answer came to him with startling clarity. "We show them what family really looks like," he said. "And we don't give up until they understand." The phone call with the family lawyer came at 6 in the morning, 2 days after Elena's devastating news about the custody challenge. Marcus had been awake since 4, pacing the kitchen and drinking coffee while 7 children slept upstairs, unaware that their world was hanging in the balance once again. "Mr. Thompson? This is Rebecca Chun from the Chun & Associates law firm in Albuquerque. Elena Martinez asked me to call you directly about the custody situation." Marcus gripped the phone tighter, prepared for more bad news. "What's the latest?" "There's been an interesting development. I've been reviewing the case file for Elena's sister's ex-husband, Robert Gutierrez. He's claiming he wants custody of Lucia, Mateo, and Diego, his biological children, with Maria Martinez. But there are some significant problems with his petition." Marcus grabbed a notepad, ready to take notes. "What kind of problems?" "For starters, he's 3 years behind on child support payments. He hasn't had contact with these children since their mother became ill, and there's documented evidence that he refused to help with medical expenses or caregiving during Maria's final months. Most damaging to his case, he was arrested for domestic violence against a subsequent girlfriend just 6 months ago." The relief that flooded through Marcus was immediate but cautious. "Does that mean Elena can come home?" "Not immediately. The court has to review all the evidence, and we need to present a compelling case for why the children should remain with Elena in Montana rather than being placed with their biological father in New Mexico. That's where you come in, Mr. Thompson." Rebecca Chun explained the strategy she'd developed with Elena's input. They would argue that the children had found stability and thriving in their current placement, that disrupting their established family unit would cause significant psychological harm, and that Elena had created a secure, nurturing environment that met all their physical and emotional needs. The court will want to see documentation of their school performance, medical care, living conditions, and emotional well-being. But more importantly, they'll want to understand the family dynamic you've all created together. Are you prepared to testify about your role in these children's lives? Marcus looked around the kitchen where he'd learned to make pancakes for 8 people, where homework got finished at the table while he cooked dinner, where baby Lucia had taken her first steps just the week before. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "whatever it takes." "There's one more thing," Rebecca added carefully. "The strongest case we can make is if you and Elena formalize your relationship. Not necessarily marriage, but some legal documentation that shows you're committed long-term partners in raising these children. Are you prepared for that level of commitment?" The question hung in the air as Marcus considered its implications. Formalizing their partnership would mean legal and financial responsibility for 7 children, a binding commitment that went far beyond the informal arrangement they'd stumbled into. It would mean Elena's past became his past, her obligations became his obligations, her family became his family in the eyes of the law. "Yes," he said again, and realized he meant it completely. The conversation with the children that evening was one of the most difficult Marcus had ever navigated. He gathered them in the living room, noting how they arranged themselves in their familiar protective formation. Isabella holding the baby, the twins flanking Elena's empty chair, Miguel and Diego bookending the group like sentries. "I need to tell you what's happening with Elena," he began, choosing his words carefully. "There's a man in New Mexico who says he wants some of you to come live with him instead of staying here with our family." The reaction was immediate and fierce. "Diego, stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "He's not our family. He left us when Mom got sick." "He never even sent birthday cards," Sophia added, her voice trembling. "Elena's been taking care of us for 2 years." Marcus held up a hand for quiet. "I know, Elena knows. And we're going to fight this together. But I need you all to understand what that means." He explained the legal process in terms they could understand, that there would be court hearings, interviews with social workers, and evaluations of their home situation. He told them that Elena was working with a lawyer to prove that their current family arrangement was what was best for everyone involved. "What if the judge doesn't believe us?" Matteo asked, climbing into Marcus's lap with the unconscious trust that had developed over the past months. "Then we keep fighting," Marcus said firmly. "We document every good day, every achievement, every moment of happiness you have here. We show them that families aren't just about blood relationships, they're about love and commitment and taking care of each other." Isabella, ever practical, asked the question that was weighing on everyone's minds. "What happens to us if Elena can't come back? Do we have to go live with him?" Marcus met her gaze directly. "You're not going anywhere unless you want to. I've already talked to a lawyer about becoming your legal guardian if necessary. This is your home, and I'm not letting anyone take you away from it." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. These children had learned not to trust promises from adults, but something in Marcus's tone seemed to reach them. Miguel was the first to speak. "You'd really do that? Take on all 7 of us officially?" "I'd be honored to," Marcus replied, and realized he meant every word. The weeks that followed were a wind of legal preparation and emotional adjustment. Marcus found himself documenting aspects of their life together that he'd taken for granted. The way Isabella had blossomed in her advanced placement classes, how Diego's shy demeanor had given way to confident participation in 4-H club activities, the remarkable progress Matteo had made in overcoming his separation anxiety. Each child responded differently to the stress of the legal proceedings. Sophia and Carmen threw themselves into their schoolwork with renewed determination, as if perfect grades could somehow prove their worthiness to stay together. Miguel took on additional responsibilities around the ranch, feeding cattle and maintaining equipment with the serious focus of someone trying to demonstrate his value to the family unit, but it was the younger children's reactions that most clearly illustrated what was at stake. Matteo began having nightmares again, waking Marcus in the middle of the night with tears and requests for reassurance that he wouldn't have to leave. Baby Lucia, who had just begun walking confidently, started clinging to familiar adults and crying when strangers approached. The court-appointed social worker, Janet Morrison, arrived on a gray October morning for what everyone knew was a crucial evaluation. Unlike the hostile CPS worker from months before, Mrs. Morrison approached the visit with professional curiosity. Rather than predetermined judgment, she spent 3 hours at the ranch, observing the children's interactions with Marcus and with each other, reviewing their school records and medical files, and conducting individual interviews with each child old enough to express their preferences. Marcus watched nervously as she took notes about their living arrangements, the children's schedules, and the support systems they'd established. But her questions revealed a deeper understanding of family dynamics than he'd expected. "Tell me about a typical evening in your household," she said, settling into the kitchen while children did homework around the table. Marcus described their routine: dinner together, homework supervision, chores distributed according to age and ability, bedtime stories for the younger ones, and the informal family meetings where decisions got made collectively. "Who disciplines the children when they misbehave?" "We both do," Marcus said, then corrected himself. "Elena and I both do when she's here." The children respond to consistent expectations and clear consequences. Isabella helps with the younger ones, but the adults make the final decisions. Mrs. Morrison watched Isabella help Matteo with his math worksheet while Sophia set the table for dinner. These children seem remarkably well adjusted for having experienced significant trauma and displacement. They're resilient, Marcus agreed. And they take care of each other. Elena taught them that family means looking out for everyone, not just yourself. The individual interviews were the most nerve-wracking part of the evaluation. Marcus couldn't hear what was being said, but he could gauge the children's comfort levels by their body language when they emerged. The twins came out holding hands and giggling about something Mrs. Morrison had asked. Miguel looked serious but confident. Diego had clearly been crying, but his posture suggested relief rather than distress. It was Isabella's interview that took the longest, and when she finally emerged, her face showed the strain of being asked to articulate complex emotions and family loyalties. She wanted to know if I felt like I had to take care of everyone, Isabella told Marcus later. I tried to explain that it's not a burden, it's just what families do. But I don't think adults always understand the difference. Mrs. Morrison's report, delivered to the court a week later, became a crucial piece of evidence in Elena's favor. She documented the children's academic progress, their emotional stability, and the secure attachment relationships they'd formed with both Elena and Marcus. Most importantly, she noted that separating the biological siblings from their established family unit would likely cause significant psychological harm. The children in this placement demonstrate clear signs of thriving, she wrote. They have established routines, supportive relationships, and a sense of belonging that would be difficult to replicate in an alternative placement. Mr. Thompson has stepped into a paternal role with competence and genuine affection, while Ms. Martinez continues to be the primary emotional anchor for all 7 children. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elena's lawyer had been investigating Robert Gutierrez's background and discovered that his sudden interest in his biological children coincided with his recent unemployment and mounting debt. Phone records showed he'd been in contact with a private investigator who specialized in locating children for custody cases, usually for clients seeking to reduce child support obligations or claim dependency exemptions for tax purposes. He's not interested in parenting these children, Rebecca Chen explained during a conference call that included Marcus, Elena, and the children's court-appointed advocate. He's interested in the financial benefits of claiming them as dependents, and possibly in accessing any survivor benefits they might be receiving from their mother's death. The revelation changed the entire dynamic of the case. What had appeared to be a father seeking to reunite with his children was revealed as a financially motivated attempt to exploit vulnerable minors for economic gain. Elena's voice cracked with emotion when she learned about this development. I knew something wasn't right, she said. Robert never showed any interest in being a father when Maria was alive. He used to complain about how much the children cost, how they interfered with his plans. With this new information, Rebecca Shun filed additional motions documenting Robert's history of abandonment and his current ulterior motives. The court agreed to an expedited hearing, recognizing that the children's well-being was being threatened by someone seeking to exploit rather than protect them. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself adapting to his role as temporary single parent with surprising competence. He learned to braid hair while making breakfast, to mediate sibling disputes while balancing baby Lucia on his hip, and to provide emotional support for children processing complex grief and uncertainty. The evening phone calls with Elena became the anchor point of each day. She would speak with each child individually, helping with homework questions, listening to their daily adventures, and providing the emotional continuity that kept their sense of family intact despite the physical separation. But it was during these conversations that Marcus began to understand the depth of Elena's fear about the custody challenge. She wasn't just worried about losing the 3 biological children, she was terrified that the legal battle would tear apart the entire family unit they'd all worked so hard to build. What if the court decides I'm not stable enough for any of them? she asked during one late-night call. What if Isabella and Miguel get placed in different foster homes? What if the twins get separated? Marcus had been wondering the same thing, but hearing Elena voice these fears crystallized his own resolve. That's not going to happen, he said firmly. We're going to make sure it doesn't happen. How can you be so certain? Because I'm going to marry you. The words surprised them both. Marcus hadn't planned to propose over the phone during a legal crisis, but suddenly it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Marriage would strengthen their legal position, demonstrate their commitment to the family they'd created, and provide additional security for all 7 children. Marcus, Elena said softly, you don't have to do that. You don't have to sacrifice your freedom for us. It wouldn't be a sacrifice, he replied, realizing as he spoke that he meant it completely. It would be choosing the life I want to live, the family I want to have, the woman I want to build a future with. The silence stretched between them. Across the miles, filled with all the things they hadn't yet said to each other about love and commitment and the unexpected ways that families could be formed. Are you proposing to me from 1,000 miles away while I'm sitting in a lawyer's office in Albuquerque? Elena asked, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice despite her tears. I'm proposing to you from the kitchen of our home, where our children are sleeping upstairs and your coffee mug is still sitting on the counter because I can't bring myself to put it away, he said. I'm proposing because I want to make this official, this family we've built together. I want to promise you and them that this is permanent, that we're in this together no matter what the courts or the bureaucrats or anyone else decides. When Elena said yes, her voice choked with emotion. Marcus felt something settle into place that he hadn't even realized was missing. This wasn't the marriage he'd planned in his youth, and Elena wasn't the woman he'd imagined himself withal. Those years ago. But this was real and right and exactly what he wanted for the rest of his life. The children took the news of the engagement with a mixture of joy and practical concern that perfectly captured their personalities. Isabella immediately began planning logistics, while Miguel asked if this meant he could officially call Marcus Dad. The twins wanted to know if they could have a wedding cake, and Diego wondered if married people got different kinds of mail, but it was Mateo's response that most clearly illustrated what this commitment meant to the family. The 5-year-old climbed into Marcus's lap and asked, "Does this mean you can't give us back now?" "I could never give you back," Marcus assured him. "You're my family forever, no matter what." As October turned to November, the legal momentum began shifting decisively in their favor. Robert Gutierrez's case fell apart under scrutiny, his motivations exposed as entirely self-serving. The court recognized that the children's best interests lay in maintaining their current stable placement rather than disrupting it for someone who'd shown no genuine interest in parenting. But the real victory came when Elena was finally cleared to return to Montana, her legal obligations resolved and her fitness as a guardian officially recognized by the court system. The custody challenge was dismissed, and Robert Gutierrez was ordered to resume paying the back child support he owed before he could even consider any future contact with his biological children. The day Elena came home was crisp and clear, with snow dusting the mountains and the promise of winter in the air. Marcus and all 7 children waited on the front porch as the taxi from the airport made its way up the long gravel drive. When Elena stepped out of the car, Mateo broke free from the group and ran to her with the abandon of a child who'd learned that sometimes the adults he loved actually did come back. The others followed more slowly, but with equal joy, surrounding Elena with the kind of fierce group hug that spoke of real relief and profound gratitude. "Welcome home," Marcus said, and when Elena looked up at him over the sea of children's heads, her eyes bright with tears, he knew that they'd all finally found exactly where they belonged. Christmas morning arrived with the particular magic that only happens when a house is filled with children who've learned not to take joy for granted. Marcus woke before dawn to the sound of whispered excitement in the hallway. followed by Isabella's firm but gentle voice, reminding her siblings that they'd promised to wait until 7 o'clock before waking the adults. He lay in bed for a moment, savoring the anticipation that hummed through the house like electricity. This was their first Christmas as a complete family, the first time in 3 years that he'd had reason to celebrate, and he wanted to remember every detail of how it felt. To be part of something larger than himself again. Elena stirred beside him, her hand finding his under the covers. They'd been married for 6 weeks now. A simple ceremony at the courthouse with all 7 children as witnesses and Sheriff Bradley officiating. Elena had worn a cream-colored dress that Sophia and Carmen had helped her pick out, and Marcus had surprised everyone by wearing the suit he'd been married in before, altered to fit the man he'd become rather than the one he'd been. "Are you ready for this?" Elena murmured, her voice thick with sleep and contentment. "I've been ready since the day you all showed up on my doorstep," Marcus replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. The morning that followed was controlled chaos in the best possible way. 7 children unwrapping presents with the careful appreciation of those who understood that abundance wasn't guaranteed, squealing with delight over practical gifts that had been chosen with love and attention to individual needs and wants. Marcus had spent weeks observing and planning, learning each child's interests with the dedication of someone who understood that getting Christmas right was about more than just buying toys. Miguel received a set of advanced mechanical tools and a subscription to a robotics magazine. Isabella got the art supplies she'd been quietly coveting and a small desk for her room, where she could pursue her growing interest in graphic design. The twins had requested matching but not identical gifts, a distinction that had required careful navigation. Sophia received a chemistry set after her teacher mentioned her aptitude for science, while Carmen got a deluxe sewing kit complete with patterns for making doll clothes, a hobby she developed while helping Elena with household mending. Diego's gift reflected his love for the ranch animals, a camera specifically designed for nature photography, along with a guidebook for Montana wildlife. He'd been documenting the seasonal changes around the property with careful sketches, and Marcus had recognized a genuine artistic talent that deserved encouragement. Mateo, now 6 and growing more confident every day, received the bicycle he'd been dreaming about, red with streamers on the handlebars and training wheels that could be removed when he was ready. But his most treasured gift was the wooden toolbox Marcus had crafted in the barn during evening hours, complete with child-sized tools that would allow him to help with ranch maintenance. Baby Lucia, now walking and beginning to form recognizable words, delighted in the wrapping paper as much as the toys themselves. Though she showed particular fascination with the musical instruments, Marcus had chosen a tiny keyboard, a set of maracas, and a xylophone that would undoubtedly drive the adults crazy, but would support her obvious love of rhythm and sound. But it was Elena's reaction to her gift that most clearly illustrated how much their life had changed. Marcus had given her a ring, not an expensive diamond, but a simple band engraved with the coordinates of their ranch and the date they'd become a family. Her tears weren't just about the jewelry, but about what it represented: permanence, belonging, and the kind of security she'd never imagined possible. "I have something for you too," she said, pulling a wrapped package from behind the couch where she'd hidden it from curious children. Inside was a photo album she'd been secretly creating, documenting their journey from strangers to family through pictures taken over the past months. The first page showed the children's arrival at the bus station, their faces cautious and hopeful. The progression through the pages told the story of gradual relaxation, growing trust, and deepening bonds. The final page held a photo Isabella had taken just the week before, the entire family working together to decorate the Christmas tree, with Marcus lifting Mateo to place the star on top while Elena held baby Lucia, and the other children arranged ornaments with careful consideration. It was a picture of people who belonged together, who'd chosen each other and made it work through determination, and love. "We look like a real family," Marcus said, studying the image. "We are a real family," Elena corrected gently. "We always were." The weeks following Christmas brought a settling into routines that felt both established and evolving. The children had found their rhythm in the local school system, with Isabella emerging as a natural leader among her peers and Miguel discovering a talent for competitive mathematics that his previous schools had never recognized. The twins had developed a friendship with neighboring ranch children, leading to playdates and sleepovers that filled the house with even more laughter and activity. Diego had joined the 4-H club and was raising the calf as his project, documenting its growth with the same careful attention he brought to all his interests. Even Mateo had overcome most of his separation anxiety, though he still preferred to know exactly where Elena and Marcus were at all times. His vocabulary had expanded dramatically, and he'd developed the endearing habit of narrating his activities in a mixture of English and Spanish that charmed everyone who heard it. Elena had found work that perfectly suited their family's needs, a combination of freelance bookkeeping for local businesses and a partnership with a seamstress in town who needed help with alterations and custom work. The income wasn't substantial, but it provided Elena with professional satisfaction and financial independence while allowing her to work primarily from home. Marcus discovered that sharing the ranch work with eager helpers made everything more enjoyable, even if it sometimes took longer to complete tasks when they were being done as teaching opportunities. Miguel had proved particularly adept with mechanical repairs, while Diego's attention to detail made him invaluable for record keeping and livestock monitoring. The legal challenges that had threatened to tear them apart became distant memories, though the experience had strengthened their understanding of how precious and fragile their family unit was. They kept meticulous records now, not out of paranoia but from recognition that their unconventional family structure might always face scrutiny from those who couldn't understand how love could transcend traditional boundaries. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities. Isabella was accepted into a summer program for gifted students at the state university, an opportunity that would have been impossible to pursue when the family was constantly moving and struggling for basic stability. Miguel was selected for a regional science fair, his project on renewable energy solutions earning recognition that opened doors to advanced placement courses. The younger children thrived as well, with the twins' reading levels advancing rapidly and Diego's photography skills developing to the point where his work was displayed in the school art show. Even baby Lucia was reaching developmental milestones ahead of schedule, her secure environment allowing her natural intelligence to flourish. But perhaps the most significant development was the gradual evolution of Marcus and Elena's relationship. From practical partnership to deep emotional connection, the crisis that had forced them to commit legally had also created space for genuine intimacy to develop. They discovered shared interests beyond child rearing, a love of old movies, appreciation for good coffee, and the comfortable silences that develop between people who truly know each other. The children had noticed the change, commenting with the direct honesty that only children possess about how their parents seemed happier, more relaxed, more affectionate with each other. Isabella, ever perceptive, mentioned that it felt good to see adults who actually liked each other rather than just tolerating each other's presence. Summer brought extended family visits that would have been impossible during their previous nomadic existence. Elena's aunt from Colorado came to stay for 2 weeks, bringing stories about Maria and helping the children connect with their cultural heritage. Marcus's sister finally made the trip from Denver, arriving with her own children for a chaotic but joyful week that filled every bedroom and tested everyone's patience while creating memories that would last for years. The ranch itself began to reflect their expanding family, with additions and improvements that accommodated their needs while honoring the property's history. A larger deck provided space for family meals outdoors, A playground area near the barn gave the younger children a safe space to expend energy while staying within sight of adult supervision. Marcus had also begun plans for expanding the ranch operation, not just to support their larger family, but because the children's enthusiasm for agricultural life had rekindled his own passion for farming. Miguel's interest in sustainable technology led to research into solar power and water conservation. Diego's careful observations of animal behavior contributed to improved livestock management practices. The photography hobby had evolved into something approaching a small business, with Diego's images of ranch life attracting attention from tourism boards and agricultural publications. Isabella's artistic talents were developing in directions that suggested genuine commercial potential. Even the twins had discovered entrepreneurial spirits, creating and selling friendship bracelets at the local farmers market with profits carefully saved for college funds. As autumn returned, marking the full year since Elena and the children had first arrived at the ranch, the family established new traditions that honored both their journey and their future. The anniversary of their first meeting became a celebration called Family Day, marked not with gifts but with acts of service to others who might be struggling with displacement or hardship. Elena organized donations of clothing and household items to local social services. Marcus volunteered his mechanical skills to help low-income families with equipment repairs. The children participated in age-appropriate ways, from Isabella tutoring younger students to Mateo helping pack food boxes at the community pantry. These activities reinforced the lesson that had emerged from their own experience, that family wasn't just about receiving love and support, but about extending it to others who needed it. The children understood viscerally that their security wasn't guaranteed, and that helping others wasn't just charity but recognition of shared humanity. The local community had embraced them completely, with neighbors who initially viewed their unconventional family with curiosity, now treating them as integral parts of the rural social fabric. Marcus found himself serving on school committees and agricultural boards, while Elena's bookkeeping skills made her invaluable to local nonprofits and small businesses. But it was the quiet moments that most clearly illustrated how completely their lives had transformed. Evening conversations on the front porch while children played in the yard. Homework sessions around the kitchen table that naturally evolved into discussions about dreams and goals. Bedtime stories that included all the children, regardless of age, gathered together in whichever room felt most comfortable. Marcus would often catch Elena watching these scenes with expression of wonder, as if she still couldn't quite believe their good fortune. He understood the feeling. After years of isolation and grief, the constant presence of voices and laughter and everyday chaos felt like emerging from a long winter into spring. The changes in each family member were remarkable. Isabella had grown into her role as big sister with grace and maturity, but had also learned to be a teenager rather than a perpetual caretaker. Miguel's confidence had blossomed along with his academic achievements, while maintaining the gentle nature that made him such a wonderful brother to the younger children. The twins had developed distinct personalities while maintaining their close bond. Sophia's scientific interests were matched by Carmen's artistic talents, but both girls shared an optimism and resilience that spoke to their sense of security. Diego had overcome his initial shyness to become a thoughtful leader among his peers, while Mateo had grown from an anxious 5-year-old into a confident 6-year-old who approached new experiences with curiosity rather than fear. Baby Lucia, now a toddler with definite opinions and an impressive vocabulary, had never known instability or uncertainty. She moved through the world with the confidence of a child who'd always been loved and protected, taking for granted the kind of security that her siblings had learned not to expect. As winter approached again, bringing with it the anniversary of Elena's legal troubles and the custody crisis that had nearly torn them apart, the family reflected on how much they'd grown and changed. The challenges that had once seemed insurmountable now felt like necessary steps in their journey, toward becoming the people they were meant to be. Elena had found her strength, not just as a caretaker, but as a true partner in building something lasting. Marcus had discovered that his capacity for love was far greater than he believed possible. That grief hadn't diminished his heart, but had prepared it for a different kind of happiness. The children had learned that family could be chosen as well as inherited, that love expressed through action was more powerful than love expressed through words. And that home wasn't a place but a collection of people who chose to care for each other regardless of circumstances. On the anniversary of their first Christmas together, as they gathered around the tree that had become a symbol of their permanence, Marcus looked around at the faces that had become his world. 7 children who'd taught him that parenthood wasn't about biology but about commitment. A woman who'd shown him that love could be both practical and profound, both healing and transformative. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked, noticing his contemplative mood. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are," Marcus replied. "Not because everything has been easy, but because we found each other when we needed it most." Isabella, overhearing from her spot on the floor where she was helping Lucia with a puzzle, looked up with the wisdom that had been forged through early hardship. "We made our own luck," she said simply. "We chose to be a family, and we worked to make it real." As Marcus surveyed the scene, homework and toys scattered across surfaces, children engaged in various activities while staying connected to the family unit, Elena moving among them with the confident grace of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. He realized that Isabella was absolutely right. They had made their own luck, their own family, their own happiness. And looking toward the future, he could see years of similar evenings stretching ahead, filled with the ordinary magic of people who'd chosen to love each other unconditionally. The ranch house that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with the sounds of a family that had been worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth cherishing every single day. 3 years after Elena and the children first arrived at the ranch, Marcus stood in the doorway of what had once been his home office, watching 18-year-old Isabella pack her belongings for college. The room that had housed his dusty computer and forgotten tax returns was now bright with posters, photography prints, and the accumulated treasures of a teenager who'd finally had the luxury of staying in one place long enough to call it home. "I can't believe I'm actually doing this," Isabella said, carefully wrapping a framed photo of the whole family taken at last year's county fair. 3 years ago, I thought I'd never graduate high school, let alone go to college." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, marveling at the young woman she'd become. The scholarship to Montana State University had been hard-earned through 4 years of exemplary grades, community service, and the kind of determination that came from understanding how precious opportunities could be. "Your mom would be proud," Marcus said quietly, then paused. "Both your moms would be proud." Isabella smiled, the expression free of the guarded caution that had characterized her early months at the ranch. "Maria always said education was something no one could take away from you. And Elena proved that you could build a family anywhere if you were willing to work for it." The conversation was interrupted by 16-year-old Miguel bursting through the door with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Dad, the college recruiter from Montana Tech just called. They want to schedule another meeting about the engineering scholarship." Marcus felt the familiar surge of pride that accompanied any of his children's achievements. Miguel's mechanical aptitude had evolved into genuine engineering talent, supported by the stability to pursue advanced mathematics and science courses that would have been impossible during their nomadic years. "That's fantastic news," Marcus said, then grinned. "Though I have to admit, part of me was hoping you'd choose the local community college so I wouldn't have to say goodbye to another one of my kids." Miguel's expression softened with understanding. The family had discussed the emotional challenges of children leaving home, acknowledging that their close bonds made separation more difficult than it might be for families who took time together for granted. "I'll only be 2 hours away," Miguel reminded him. And Diego's already planning to study photography at the same school in a couple years. We'll probably end up living together again. The mention of Diego brought Marcus's attention to the 14-year-old, who was documenting Isabella's packing process with his ever-present camera. His wildlife photography had evolved into a serious pursuit, with several of his images winning regional contests and catching the attention of professional photographers who'd begun mentoring him. "Are you getting everything for the family documentary?" Marcus asked, knowing that Diego had been creating a visual record of their family's milestones and transitions. "I want to remember how this feels," Diego replied seriously. "The good parts and the hard parts. Someday, when we're all grown up and scattered, we'll want to see what we looked like when we were all still together." The wisdom in his statement reflected the maturity that had developed in all the children as they'd grown secure enough to contemplate futures beyond mere survival. They understood that their family configuration would evolve as they aged, but they also trusted that the bonds they'd forged would endure regardless of geography. Elena appeared in the doorway carrying a box of Isabella's books, baby Lucia now, a confident 4-year-old trailing behind her with determined steps. The toddler who'd once been passed from person to person had grown into a little girl, with definite opinions and the secure assumption that every adult in her world would listen to them. "Bella, you forgot these," Lucia announced importantly, holding up a collection of hair accessories. "You need pretty things for college." Isabella knelt to accept the offerings with appropriate seriousness. "You're absolutely right, Lucy. Thank you for making sure I don't forget anything important." The interaction illustrated how seamlessly Lucia had been integrated into the family dynamic. Unlike her older siblings, she had no memories of instability or uncertainty. To her, having 7 siblings and 2 parents who weren't biologically related was simply the natural order of things. Elena caught Marcus's eye over the children's heads, and he saw his own mixture of pride and melancholy reflected in her expression. They'd known this day would come, had planned for it, encouraged it, celebrated the academic achievements that made it possible. But knowing that your family structure would change didn't make the actual transition any less emotionally complex. "The twins want to show you something before dinner," Elena told Isabella. "They've been working on a secret project in their room all week." Sophia and Carmen, now 11, had developed into distinct individuals while maintaining their special twin connection. Sophia's scientific interests had led to participation in regional science fairs, while Carmen's artistic talents had evolved into serious study of textile design and fashion illustration. The secret project turned out to be a hand-sewn quilt featuring fabric squares that represented important memories from Isabella's high school years. Each square had been carefully chosen and arranged to tell the story of her transformation from a guarded 15-year-old to a confident young woman ready to take on the world. "We wanted you to have something from home for your dorm room," Sophia explained with characteristic directness. "Something that would remind you that we're still your family even when we're far away," Carmen added with her more romantic sensibility. Isabella's tears were immediate and unashamed. The quilt represented thousands of hours of careful work. But more importantly, it demonstrated the depth of thought and love that had gone into creating something meaningful rather than simply purchasing a going-away gift. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me," Isabella said, gathering both twins into a fierce hug. "I'll treasure it forever." 8-year-old Mateo, who had grown from an anxious kindergartner into a confident 3rd grader, presented his own contribution to Isabella's college send-off, a small wooden box he'd crafted in Marcus's workshop, complete with careful joints and a smooth finish that reflected months of patient learning. "It's for keeping important things safe," Mateo explained solemnly. "Like letters from home and pictures and maybe some candy for when you get homesick." The gift represented more than woodworking skills. It demonstrated Mateo's evolution from a child who clung to familiar adults out of fear to one who could think beyond his own needs to consider what others might want or need. That evening's dinner was both celebration and gentle farewell, marked by Isabella's favorite foods and stories that had become family legends over the past 3 years. Elena had prepared chili rellenos using her grandmother's recipe, while Marcus contributed his now famous sourdough, bread that had become a family staple. The conversation flowed between English and Spanish, as it always did when emotions ran high, with the children who'd learned Spanish from Elena translating for those who hadn't yet mastered the language. It was a reminder of how their family had become truly bicultural, honoring both Elena's heritage and Marcus's Montana roots. "Remember when you first got here and you wouldn't let anyone else help with Lucia?" Miguel asked Isabella, grinning at the memory. "I was so scared someone would make a mistake and she'd get hurt," Isabella replied, laughing at her former anxiety. "I thought I was the only one who could take care of everyone properly. You were protecting us," Diego added thoughtfully. "You always did that, even when we didn't realize we needed protection." The acknowledgement of Isabella's early role in keeping the family together during their most vulnerable period led to a broader conversation about how each of them had contributed to their collective success. Elena's unwavering commitment to keeping them all together, Marcus's willingness to open his home and heart to strangers, each child's gradual trust and investment in building something permanent. "We saved each other," Elena said simply. "All of us. We gave each other reasons to hope for better things." As the evening wound down and the younger children were shepherded toward bedtime routines, Marcus found himself on the front porch with Elena and Isabella, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The same view that had once symbolized his isolation now represented the foundation upon which they'd built their extraordinary life together. "Are you nervous about leaving?" Elena asked Isabella gently. "A little," Isabella admitted. "But it's good nervous, not scared nervous. I know I can come home whenever I need to, and I know you'll all still be here when I do." The confidence in her voice reflected the security that had allowed her to contemplate independence without fear of abandonment. She trusted that her family would endure distance and time, that the bonds they'd forged were strong enough to withstand the normal transitions of growing up. "We'll visit you," Marcus promised. "Probably more often than you want us to. And holidays will always bring everyone back together." "I'm counting on it," Isabella replied, settling back in her chair with the contentment of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Even as she prepared to venture into new territory. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus reflected on how much their definition of family had expanded and evolved. What had begun as a desperate arrangement between strangers had become something richer and more complex than traditional family structures, a chosen kinship based on mutual commitment rather than biological accident. Isabella's departure for college would be the first of many transitions as the children matured and pursued their individual dreams. But each separation would also be balanced by new connections, new family members who would join them through marriage and birth, new generations who would carry forward the values they'd learned about love, commitment, and the power of choosing to care for each other. The ranch house that had once been a sanctuary for one grieving man had become the launching pad for 8 people who understood that home wasn't a place but a collection of relationships worth preserving across time and distance. 10 years after that first desperate winter arrival, the ranch house buzzed with the organized chaos of a Thanksgiving celebration that had grown far beyond anything Marcus could have imagined when he was living alone in his silent sanctuary. The dining room table, expanded with card tables and sawhorses to accommodate everyone, stretched from the kitchen nearly to the living room, covered with mismatched tablecloths and set with plates that told the story of a decade's worth of garage sale finds and wedding gifts. Isabella, now 28 and married to a fellow engineer she'd met at Montana State, stood at the kitchen counter teaching her 3-year-old daughter, Sophia, how to roll pie crust while keeping one eye on her infant son sleeping in his carrier. Little girl's dark curls and serious expression marked her clearly as Isabella's daughter, though her fearless approach to new experiences suggested she'd inherited the confidence that came from never knowing uncertainty. "Abuela Elena, look," Sophia called out in the fluid bilingual speech that had become natural for the newest generation. "I'm making the pie bumpy like mountains." Elena, now 54 with silver threading through her dark hair, moved between the kitchen and dining room with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent years orchestrating large family gatherings. Her face bore laugh lines that hadn't existed during those early worried years, and her movements carried the confident authority of a woman who'd found her place in the world and made it exactly what she wanted it to be. "That's beautiful, Mia," Elena replied, pausing to admire Sophia's handiwork before checking on the turkey that Miguel had brought from his own home, 20 miles down the valley. Miguel, 26, and now a successful mechanical engineer for a renewable energy company, had indeed ended up living near the ranch, drawn back by the land he'd learned to love and the family connections that had given him the foundation to build his own life. His wife Jennifer, a teacher he'd met during his college years, was currently helping the twins, now 21, and both attending the University of Montana, set up a craft station for the younger children who would arrive throughout the afternoon. Sophia had pursued her early interest in science, earning a degree in environmental engineering, while Carmen had followed her artistic inclinations into graphic design and marketing. Both young women moved through the house with the easy confidence of people who'd never doubted their right to take up space in the world, a dramatic contrast to the careful, apologetic children who'd arrived a decade earlier. Diego, now 24, had turned his teenage photography passion into a thriving business documenting Montana ranch life and wildlife. His images hung in galleries across the state, and his coffee table book about sustainable ranching had earned national recognition. He'd driven up from Bozeman that morning with his girlfriend Maria, a coincidence of names that always made Elena smile, who was pursuing her veterinary degree, and had quickly been absorbed into the family's tradition of putting newcomers to work during holiday preparations. But it was the arrival of Mateo that brought the most dramatic illustration of how much their lives had transformed. Now 18 and a senior in high school, he pulled into the driveway behind the wheel of the truck Marcus had helped him restore, with his girlfriend Ashley, a rancher's daughter from the next county over, in the passenger seat, and a cooler full of fish they'd caught that morning in the back. The boy who'd once been too anxious to speak to strangers now moved through the world with quiet confidence, equally comfortable discussing college plans with adults and teaching younger children how to tie knots or identify bird calls. His acceptance to the state university's agriculture program represented not just academic achievement, but the fulfillment of a dream that had grown from those early mornings helping Marcus with ranch work. Lucia, now 14 and taller than Elena, was directing the chaos of cousin entertainment with the natural leadership that had emerged as she'd grown into her role as the family's bridge between generations. She spoke to the adults as an equal while never forgetting to translate for the youngest children or mediate disputes between cousins with different ideas about games and activities. The little girl who'd been passed from person to person during those early uncertain months had become the family diplomat, equally fluent in English and Spanish, equally comfortable with ranch work and academic pursuits, equally beloved by her older siblings and the growing collection of nieces and nephews, who saw her as the coolest aunt in existence. As the afternoon progressed and extended family members arrived, the house filled with the multi-layered conversations that had become their Thanksgiving tradition. Marcus's sister and her family had driven from Denver, bringing their teenage children, who now considered the ranch their second home, and their Montana cousins their closest friends. Elena's aunt from Colorado had made the trip as well, accompanied by two of Maria's cousins who'd stayed in touch with the family over the years, creating connections that honored the children's heritage while embracing their chosen family structure. But perhaps the most significant arrival was that Of Rebecca Chen, the lawyer who'd fought for Elena's custody rights all those years ago, now retired and considered family despite the lack of blood relation. She'd been instrumental in helping other families navigate similar challenges, using Elena and Marcus's case as a template for creative, legal solutions that prioritize children's well-being over bureaucratic convenience. "Every time I see you all together like this," Rebecca said, settling into the comfortable chair that had become designated as hers during visits, "I'm reminded why I chose family law. This is what success looks like, not just keeping families together, but watching them thrive across generations." The formal dinner was preceded by the gratitude circle that had evolved from those early family meetings where they discussed practical concerns and emotional needs. Each person, from the youngest cousin to the oldest aunt, shared something they were grateful for from the past year. The responses ranged from the profound to the delightfully mundane. Isabella expressed gratitude for her husband's patience during the sleepless months of new motherhood. Miguel thanked his family for teaching him that work and love weren't competing priorities, but complementary aspects of a well-lived life. Sophia acknowledged the support that had allowed her to pursue graduate school, while Carmen celebrated the graphic design business she'd launched with clients throughout the region. Diego shared his excitement about a photography exhibition opening in the spring, while Mateo talked about the scholarship that would allow him to study sustainable agriculture without financial stress. But it was Lucia's contribution that most clearly illustrated how their family's values had been transmitted to the next generation. "I'm grateful that I grew up in a family where people choose to love each other every day," she said with the thoughtful seriousness that characterized her approach to important topics. "And I'm grateful that I learned early that families can be created, not just inherited." Elena's gratitude focused on the unexpected ways their lives had continued to expand and evolve. 10 years ago, I was just trying to keep us all together," she said, looking around the crowded room. "I never imagined we'd become the kind of family that other families want to join." Marcus's reflection encompassed the decade-long journey from isolation to abundance. "I'm grateful for the day I was brave enough to answer my door," he said simply. "And I'm grateful for every day since then that I've gotten to be part of this extraordinary adventure." The dinner conversation flowed between generations and languages, with stories that had become family legend interwoven with updates on current projects and future plans. The children who'd once been careful not to take up too much space now filled the house with laughter, debate, and the comfortable noise of people who knew they belonged exactly where they were. After dinner, as dishes were being cleared and pie was being served, Marcus found himself on the front porch with Elena, watching their extended family through the windows while baby Sophia napped against his shoulder and toddler cousins played in the yard. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd never met?" Elena asked, settling into the porch swing they'd added during the house's many improvements over the years. "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, but not with regret. "I think we were both ready for each other when we needed to be. Maybe that's how the best things happen, not according to plan, but according to readiness." The conversation was interrupted by Lucia emerging from the house with a carefully wrapped package. "I have something for both of you," she announced. With the ceremony that she brought to important occasions, inside was a leather-bound photo album she'd been secretly creating, documenting their family's evolution through images and mementos collected over the past decade. The first page showed that initial newspaper clipping about mail-order brides that had somehow survived all their moves, followed by Marcus's original profile from the correspondence website, Elena's first letter, and photos from every major milestone since . But the final section contained something unexpected: pages dedicated to the future, with college brochures, wedding planning magazines, and even baby clothes that Lucia had been collecting for when Isabella and Miguel have more children and I become an aunt again. "I wanted you to see what I see when I look at our family," Lucia explained. "Not just where we've been, but where we're going. All the good things that are still coming. The album represented more than documentation. It was a testament to the kind of security that allowed a 14-year-old to plan for the future with confidence, to assume that good things would continue happening because that's what her experience had taught her to expect. As evening approached, and family members began the reluctant process of departing for their various homes, the house gradually quieted to its familiar rhythms. The dishes were washed and put away, leftovers were packaged and distributed, and the furniture was returned to its normal configuration. But the echoes of laughter and conversation lingered in the rooms that had been transformed from a lonely man's refuge into the gathering place for an extended family that had grown through choice rather than chance. Later that night, as Marcus and Elena walked through the house, turning off lights and checking that doors were locked, they paused in each room to absorb the evidence of the day's celebration. Children's toys scattered in the living room, extra coats still hanging by the front door, the lingering sense of turkey and pie, and the particular mixture of perfumes and colognes that marked a house full of people. "I love the chaos," Elena sighed, straightening a throw pillow that had been displaced by afternoon napping. "I love that we've created something big enough and strong enough that people want to be part of it. I love that we built something that will last beyond us," Marcus replied, thinking of little Sophia learning to make pie crust and the college plans that would carry their influence into another generation. Standing in the kitchen, where it had all begun, where a desperate woman had once stood with 7 children and a bag of nearly empty groceries, they surveyed the abundance that had grown from that moment of mutual need and tentative trust. The refrigerator was covered with children's artwork, family photos, college schedules, and wedding invitations. The pantry was stocked with food from multiple cultures and cooking traditions. The bulletin board overflowed with birthday party invitations, school announcements, and pictures of grandchildren who called them Grandpa Marcus and Abuela Elena. Despite the lack of biological connection, "We did something pretty remarkable," Elena said, leaning into Marcus's embrace as they stood in the heart of the home they'd built together. "We saved each other," Marcus replied, echoing the words she'd spoken years earlier. "And then we saved a bunch of other people too." Outside, the Montana sky stretched endlessly above the ranch that had been transformed from a place of grief into a launching pad for dreams. Inside, the house held the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived and a future full of possibility. Story that had begun with a desperate mail-order bride arrangement had become something far more precious, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, commitment over convenience, and family over solitude. In the morning, there would be new challenges and opportunities, new reasons to be grateful and new ways to grow. But tonight, in the house that love had filled with laughter and hope, Marcus and Elena Thompson could rest in the knowledge that they had created something beautiful and lasting, a family that would continue to choose each other, generation after generation, for all the years to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.